Have you ever had things break in production and you're not quite sure what went wrong? I remember the good old days when you had to go use things like tail and grep and then randomly click around the app to try and figure out what broke. You don't have to do that anymore, thank heaven. All you have to do is go sign up for AirBrake and then install it in your app. AirBrake is really simple. You get a little code that you put into your config file, and then you just install the gem. That's it. Really simple to set up. Then what it does is it aggregates all of the exceptions and errors that are thrown by your application so that you don't have to keep track of that anymore. It collects other information from the system as the errors occur, so parameters and things like that, depending on where the error occurs. And one thing that drove me crazy when we first started getting apps like AirBrake doing this work is that you would get 10,000 of the same error, and that doesn't happen anymore. Now they just aggregate it all together. You can go look at the individual errors and see where and what actually happened, but when it comes right down to it, they just let you know, hey, this error occurred 10,000 times, and then you go look at the individual ones so you can get them fixed. It's really easy to install. I already said that, but I just can't stress that enough. You take 2 seconds, you get it installed, and then you're off to the races. When I'm running a business, that time that it saves me is huge. So go check them out at airbrake.io/rubyrogues, and that'll let them know that we sent you. But seriously, just make your life easier. If you go check it out at airbrake.io/rubyrogues, you'll get AirBrake free for 30 days, plus get 50% off the first 3 months on the startup plan. So go check them out. You can thank me later. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
David Richards. I think you might have said something on mute. I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. I'm coming to you live from, or semi-live, I guess. I'm at the Grand America in downtown Salt Lake City. I'm here for NGConf. So anyway, go check out devchat.tv/YouTube if you want to see what we're doing here. We also have a special guest this week, and that's Luca Guidi. Luca, do you want to say hi?
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, no problem. Do you want to just give a brief introduction, who you are? I know we've had you on the show before, but it's been a while.
Yeah, sure. My name is Luca Guidi. I live in Rome, and I work remotely for a company named DNSimple. I'm mainly known in the Ruby community because of my open source projects. One was actually Redistor, and the actual one is Hanami, a full stack web framework for Ruby, which is a big challenge for me, but it's something that is taking off, actually.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Wasn't that originally named Lotus or something like that?
It was, but there was a clash with a more famous Lotus one. I said, okay, nobody will care about that. But then I had an IBM employee that posted a GitHub issue saying, hey, what's going on here? And I said, okay, let's rename the framework. And then I picked Hanami as the original name for it.
Isn't there like a lotus pose for yoga? So
basically, they are Lotus is famous because of their Office.
Lotus Notes.
Yeah, Lotus Notes.
Yeah,
and so on. But they are trying to retarget Lotus as a web framework thing, which nobody knows about. I just discovered that day. But the point is that I've got in touch with a lawyer, US lawyer actually, and she told me, she suggested to change the name, because even if they don't ever come after me in suing me, but there is always confusion in the software industry. It's like calling a rock band the Queen. There is already something big happening in the rock music. So she suggested to change the name. I said, okay, why not? And
that's fair.
Sorry.
That makes sense.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We should get you back on to talk about Hanami, because I don't think we've covered that for a while either.
Nope. Last time was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yep. So let's just promise everybody we'll come back to that, because I think it's interesting, and I don't want to shortchange either conversation by doing one or the other. You did write a blog post, and that's what we're going to talk about, on elapsed time with Ruby. And when I first saw the article, I'm like, big deal, right? You take the ending time and the starting time, and there's a difference. And then that's the first thing you have in this article is starting equals time.now, and then whatever happens, and ending equals time.now, ending minus starting, and that's the elapsed time. And immediately, this is wrong. Let's see why. So do you want to explain some of the problems with this? And it sounds like Dave had some experience with this as well.
Yes, sure. I was on Reddit one day, and there was a guy looking for feedback for a gem that he wrote. It was about elapsed time calculation. And I said, okay, why not? Let's provide some feedback. Because I suspected that this gem was affected by this problem. So I provided feedback, and I said, okay, let's stop for a second. If a gem that's supposed to do one thing and it does wrong, what about the rest of the Ruby community? After a quick research over GitHub, I discovered that there are literally thousands of cases where it's done wrong, including Ruby arrays. So I said, okay, let's write about this problem.
So the inherent concept of getting the time in a operating system on a computer wise, they basically have a NTP server that they synchronize to. So they will go out and set their computer time to whatever the national atomic clock, one of the many servers that has the time, synchronizes it every 15 minutes or whatever.
Can I stop you real quick on behalf of our new people and have you just explain briefly what NTP is?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's a national time protocol or something. It's a external server outside of your domain or network that you are synchronizing your local computer's time to, so that your computer's time is always accurate. In a Windows world, with Windows networking and stuff, if you have a time drift, so your computer's time is different than the servers that you're trying to log into, then it's going to actually tell you that you're not allowed to log in. So keeping your computer time in sync with some kind of common server, usually external, government NTP server, then you can all be on the same page. But the reason why I hate time on computers is because depending on the computer, type of computer, the drift can vary. So let's say if you don't have any kind of external sync, you have a hardware computer, but then you also have a virtual machine running. Well, on a different computer, the problem is the virtual machine's CPU clock cycles are going to be somewhat different than the actual bare bones metal computer. So you're going to notice a larger time drift between the two systems. So especially, and I'm passionate about this area because I work for a time and attendance software product. That's what I'm creating. So finding when someone clocks in and when they clock out, if your computer is the source of a time drift that is causing, on one web server, you clock in at 8 a.m., then you clock out at 5 p.m., but the original server that you had clocked in on, it actually thinks it's 5:05. Well, now you have a difference in what the employee is getting paid, and that's because of your system, your network, or your computers. So I dislike time. So that's my reason.
Yeah, and if you are measuring the elapsed time of an operation during a time drift, during a reset, then your calculation is completely off. So this is not just about the operating system of virtual machines. It's also about the problems that the CPU, physical problems that the CPU may have. It could be temperature, it could be air pressure, magnetic fields, the age actually of the piece of hardware. So to overcome these problems, there is the NTP where you can reset time. So, but to put it really simple, if your CPU was too slow, then you reset time in the future. But if it was too fast, you set back time in the past. So time doesn't move all the way forwards as we may expect. And to overcome this problem, there is another time clock. The clock that in the CPU gives you the current timestamp is called wall clock. But there is another clock that's called monatomic clock, which is the subject of my article. It basically starts when an event is fired, which usually is the boot time of your computer. So this clock is never get reset. It doesn't suffer of time drifts and resets. So the actual math that you do at the end of your time-consuming operation is guaranteed to be more accurate. And also, because we are talking about Ruby, it's even more performant because the returning value of time now is a time object, whereas the monotonic clock returns a float, which is more lightweight. And we usually do time measurement around time-sensitive operations, so it eliminates the effort, the pressure on the VM of Ruby, makes things more lightweight.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can have a constant source, in this case, the monatomic clock is definitely that, because the elapsed time from boot, it's always incrementing, but it's always constant as far as the amount of time or the counter of seconds. So even if the clock cycle isn't correct, the CPU cycle isn't correct in counting up the time, you still have a accurate difference that you're going to be able to benchmark and compare it to. So yeah, I read the article when you had posted it on Reddit, and I thought it was really cool, especially because of my background and what I primarily work on. So it was a fun read.
It's interesting. For me, we've had this problem. I work in a fintech company, and we have problems with, for our PCI compliance, we've had to shut down access. We can only do periodic syncs, with the world clock. And so without having transparency around what time we're using, and then depending on that time for various syncs that we do with other services, has created a lot of problems. So having a monotonic time that we can count on, and then transparently making any different adjustments if needed, allows us to either replay time and make sure all of our records are fitting and we're syncing well with other services. So it just seems like that was, at least in our experience, my experience was that the blindness around time, not paying attention to time zones, time drift, all the expectations around time, and not building a system around how to fix it or how to see what I'm using and then adjust to that. That has caused problems. It's created problems for customers and problems with some of our syncs with other services. It's been a headache.
Yeah, from the article I linked, there is a Wikipedia webpage where there are listed historical major incidents in computer history because of time. The most classic one is leap seconds. They are not very well handled by CPUs, or one regarding monotonic versus time now, which caused an incident for Cloudflare that lasted for less than 1 hour, but it was a major headache for them just because of time calculation.
Yeah. So it seems like almost my entire programming life, I've been having to deal with time crap. So back in 1999, I was doing some Microsoft development work for a contractor that we had to update a lot of government databases to be Y2K compliant because they were all storing data in 2-digit numbers. I'm like, okay, well, this is a big problem. And they were using a very old, antiquated system that you couldn't just change it to a four character date. So that was then. Now I work on time and attendance stuff, so tracking employees' times. And I'm sure before I die at some point, I'm going to have to deal with the Unix time apocalypse, which is the epoch number. And for those who don't know what the epoch number is, that is the number of seconds that has elapsed since January 1st, 1970 UTC time. So it's this big, long string number. And a lot of times it's fun to see that number count up and find patterns and stuff and celebrate that particular second. But in January 19, 2038, at 3:14:07 seconds GMT time, we're going to have a 32-bit overflow, and it's going to be the year 2038 problem. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen to computers and Linux computers when that comes around.
Y2K38.
And it's always the things we don't pay attention to me anyway. like, okay, yeah, we'll think about business logic. We'll think about user experience. We'll think about internal resources and architecture and platforms. That's what we think about. But it's stuff like time and floats and integers. That's where it comes down to
take
it.
it for granted.
Yeah. It's like, it's just supposed to work, isn't it? No, it's supposed to be designed. It's supposed to be architected. Somebody's supposed to be in charge. Somebody's got to think for a minute and say, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Which unfortunately isn't me often enough. This is me looking at me and thinking, oh my goodness, how many times have I built a system just assuming that, yeah, I'm going to have time. And then we start working in multiple zones, or then we start seeing drift. And then, I need to think about that for a second.
And this subject is really interesting because today is the first day of RailsConf, and I was just watching DHH's keynote, and he was saying, like, look at all this progress we have made in life with now we don't have to worry about having to write the SQL statements and stuff. Now we have this awesome ORM that will kind of do all of that stuff in the background for us. This is progress. We don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. But then if no one worries about it, then what's going to happen in 2038 where we've lost the intricate details of what's going on behind the scenes? And now we're just focused on such a high level development aspect of things that we're going to start running into these problems that it's going to be too late when they occur if they weren't proactively prevented.
Well, the other thing is most people, like you said, are working at such a high level that when it breaks, we don't know what to do.
Yeah. And we've never dug deep down, like, look at just going in and finding that function that you can get the actual monatomic time. I'm like, that's really cool. I did not know that existed in Ruby to have that kind of API call to get that number. And so a question that I have for you is, how did you come about this conclusion, or how did you come about finding that function? So when you have this kind of problem, did you just know right away that function existed, or did you have to kind of like dig down and try to find a workaround? What was your process with it?
I already knew about that function, but and knew the problem because I use also Go to my work. Mm-hmm. So I'm also a Go developer, and there is more attention over there to this kind of engineering problems, let's say. So I discovered about monatomic clocks after the Cloudflare outage that I was mentioning before. So I knew about that, and I said, okay, what's up in Ruby world? And then I discovered this function in Ruby world. So, but during the writing of my article, I had to dig down inside the actual Ruby code that provides that function, the C code, to see which system calls was doing. And then I discovered that the low-level stuff that talks to the operating system. And that is fascinating. It's a bit overwhelming, but it's definitely fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I love how exposure to other languages or systems like Go, whenever we're exposed to something else, we have the same set of problems we always had, but we have a new set of problems and a new set of solutions. It just freshens our mind, like wakens us up to, oh yeah, I haven't been thinking about this for a long time. Or, oh, I wonder how we do this one in Ruby. And then we can come back around and have a better idea.
By the same token, we were talking about high-level systems. Ruby is a high-level language, we all know. And there are discussions going on in Go forums, newsletters, that they don't exist at all in Ruby. We don't have buffers in Ruby. I mean, because everything at the end of the day is a string. We use always a string, and that has the bright side of it is productivity, and Ruby is a perfect language for a person who wants to start their journey into computer programming. But on the downside is that when it comes down to hardcore problems, let's say, it's more complicated to get around. And there are cases in Ruby world and Ruby ecosystem where that can be compared to this time calculation problem, basically.
I have to say, though, that's one of the things that I love about Ruby is that it's flexible and high level enough to where you can be extremely productive in it. But yeah, it is problematic when you absolutely have to rely on something and it doesn't completely solve that, or it doesn't completely address that, or it has some, in the case of time drift that you may or may not be able to account for. Oh, it must have been the Wi-Fi. What I said was that I really love the fact that Ruby is super high level. And so, like you said, it's terrific for productivity. But yeah, you run into one of these issues that you have to rely on it being extremely accurate. And in this case, it just doesn't quite provide that in the way that you expect.
Yeah, and I think some of the dangers of people coming to Ruby as their first language and they never explore other languages is that they lose a lot of the insight of type safety and a lot of the things with having to go through some of the problems and what makes Ruby great and what makes the Rails framework. And I checked out Hanami a few times and what makes all of the Ruby frameworks really great. So I think that, not that I'm encouraging you to go off and learn .NET or something, but give it a shot, have a look at it and see how crappy it is, so you can have a deeper appreciation for Ruby. And you can also learn some stuff about Ruby and Rails and other frameworks just from the painstakes that you've had with other frameworks like Java Spring and that kind of stuff.
One thing too that I've done, I like that because getting integrated with different systems really teaches us. But one thing I've noticed that when it's really, really critical, one tool I can use is I can break the problem down. I think about it, breaking it down horizontally. So let's say I've got to rely on time and I don't know. So let's use monotonic time and let's put it on a queue or in a database somewhere. This is something I can come back and revisit. It's replayable and it's transparent, and therefore I can be clear and thorough. And so I can just slow it down and show the steps. Here's the event. Here's what I had. So sometimes the habit for me in Rails or Ruby is like, okay, well, here's a quick method and it'll get the job done. And then if it's critical though, or I'm not sure, or I've got to make adjustments, and maybe it's not always just time, but maybe it's just some other piece of business logic, storing it at least temporarily so that I can replay it and fix it. Or say, hey, this was the code that I used to do this critical thing that my customer depends on. So in those bottleneck areas, where business logic, if it goes wrong, things go really, really wrong, where a dependency on something like time can really mess me up. I can just store the steps, come back and do it. And then I can at least know that over time it's working, it's testable, it's transparent. So anyway, that's just been a habit of mine, is that where I get nervous, that's where I slow it down and I add transparency somehow. And I could throw that on a queue. I could throw that into something like Kafka, so it's replayable. I can see what I was doing. I was working from this data and I used this time. I produced this result, and come back later and say, hey, there is an issue here. I made assumptions. And so anyway, that might be an easy way to, like, if I had a large monotonic Rails app that does all the things and it's been around for years and nobody 100% understands it anymore, but there's an area that we're nervous that we can just add a couple of steps to add some transparency into that piece and then fix things like time or fix things like conversions or whatever the error is or whatever the situation could be.
Yeah, and to anyone who's wondering, when you're storing time in a database, always store it in UTC. It doesn't matter what your time zone is. Doesn't matter. Store it in UTC because that is the universally accepted way to store a date timestamp in a database. And you're going to save yourself a lot of headaches down the road.
I have a story.
Yes.
And it's a story that affects everybody listening to the show. So you may notice that some episodes get released up to a week late. And it's something that I'm probably going to be working on this week. So today I'm doing interviews with the speakers at NGConf, which is the Angular conference. But tomorrow I have most of the day free. They're doing a fair day, so I'll do some of that stuff, but I'm probably going to work on fixing this particular issue. And the issue is that the dates are being stored in the database as, I think they're being stored as UTC, but then the date to trigger my, what do you call them? Anyway, there's a discrepancy between the date that the episodes get released on the podcast feed and the time that kicks off the job that updates the RSS feed. And so since we're UTC +6, it's kicking off the job at local time at UTC instead of local time at Mountain Time. And so those episodes aren't scheduled to be released, and so they don't wind up in the feed. And so when we release the next week's episode, so next Tuesday rolls around, we put up a new episode of Ruby Rogues, then that feed gets updated and it goes, oh, look, an episode. And then the Ruby Rogues episode doesn't go out on the Master Ruby feed. Instead, the My Ruby story from the week before gets released on it. And so, yeah, that time zone stuff has really messed things up for me in a very recent way. And it was like, I had a few people tell me, oh, these aren't getting released. And it was like, oh, let me look at that. And yeah, that's what it turned out to be. But this was just a week or so ago.
So, you know how they say that your development environment should try to closely mimic your production environment as much as possible. And that is with your Ruby version, your database version, all of that good stuff, you should try to match as much as possible. Well, your server should be set to UTC time. You shouldn't have it to your local time zone. So your development computer is in Mountain Time, Eastern Time, or some other time zone. Set your computer time to UTC, and you will most likely uncover a lot of defects that you just never knew existed. So I wrote a script that will swap my computer's time between my local time zone and UTC time, and I can just flip-flop them back and forth as I need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One other thing just to throw in there is that I've been preaching automation for the last probably couple of months. Write a chef, Chef Solo or Chef. Chefs, you can set up a Chef server or Peppa or whatever you want, right? Ansible. But set up something that actually reaches out to all of your servers and make sure that they're all set to UTC. And that way you can just assume that they're running the right way, the way you expect them to. Because I never know. I set up a machine on DigitalOcean or AWS or something else, and I can never remember if it's set to local time or not.
When you start a new project, typically you need things like a domain name, hosting, things like that. When I choose hosting, I pick mine for the options it gives. I like to know what I'm getting and set things up just how I like them. This is why, for your projects, you should check out Linode. Linode servers feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabyte network, and Intel E5 processors. That's all the power you need to run VMs under full control, or Docker containers, who doesn't love that, encrypted disks, and VPNs. Plus, they have 10 data centers across the world and add-ons like backups, Node Balancer, and Longview to help you control your server costs. They also offer block storage for your static files, and you can get started with a $20 credit if you use the code RubyRogues2018. That credit is good for 4 months on their 1 gigabyte server. That's a lot of time to try them out and see if they're the right fit for you. That code again is RubyRogues2018. Also, if you're interested in working for Linode, they're hiring. Head to linode.com/careers to see their available positions.
I mean, personally, I cannot reset my computer to UTC, otherwise I will miss any notification and any meeting happening. But anyway, yeah.
One practice I have not embraced yet, but I swear it comes up every day for me. I do it sometimes, and that's just with containers. To run VirtualBox. I've got VMware on my machine, and to do my development in a container. I think that's beautiful because it reduces the difference between a deployed production app and the development environment. And then it's really easy to set UTC time inside of a container or, have an environment that I can work in. So that's definitely a practice. That's something for me to improve in my development workflow is finding a way to actually do that. In fact, if anybody has any recommendations of people that do that well, or tutorials or books, I'm open, because that seriously bugs me every day.
We tried DNSimple, but we have a lot of internal and external moving parts. We have the DNS servers, which are written in Erlang, and dozen of services. And also we have external registry that cannot be reproduced on a local computer. That means the registry is the entity when you want to buy, example.com, it says, okay, it's taken or it's free, here's your domain, give me $10, for instance. That is the registry, which is really hard to have a local version of it running on your machine because it's a complex system. So we try to isolate, but still the process is long, is far from us. And also, personally, I tried Docker several times. but it's just not for me yet. I'm not feel productive. It takes a lot to start tests, to start everything, and it doesn't work for me at least. So I got back to bare metal, and where I'm more productive. So no suggestions. I'm sorry.
It's tough. For me, my experience usually is the same. I get it up and running in a container, and I'm happy. And then something small happens, and I have a deliverable, and so I go back to bare metal. And so I keep falling back away from good habits. Like, yeah, I don't quite have enough of the confidence, I guess, when it's time to, and it's stuff like that. It's stuff like my text editor or my containers or something in my development workflow that really just has to be 100% smooth, or else I can't concentrate. So I've got to break that habit, find a way if I can. And the other thing I like about that, though, too, is that the external dependencies that sometimes I just can't work around, sometimes I start to solve the problem differently. It's like, oh, I really need an abstraction here, or, oh, I can do I can do 95% of my job this way, and then I can switch back to bare metal when I'm doing that way. Maybe not in all cases, but it's just it's an opportunity for me to think about, how am I thinking? Am I just doing it the way I've always done it, or is there a better way?
Yeah, back in the day before I could afford a Mac computer to do my development on, I was on Windows because, they're cheaper and that's what I had. And so my main workflow for development was I had a virtual box stood up that had a Ubuntu server running on it, and that's where my interpreter lived. So Ruby was within the virtual server, and so was MySQL, Redis, everything else was kind of contained in there. And, if this is, now 2018, you can use Docker containers to do those and have each one in their own little separate silo. But then I would just have a shared folder within the main Ruby interpreter VM. And that shared folder is where all of my code lived, my projects. And then from my bare metal machine that was running that Docker instance, I would just create a map to that network drive. And I think Docker has easier ways to do that, where you can actually map it to a virtual folder so you don't have to do anything or assemble. And then I use my bare metal editor to do all my programming, saved it kind of like over the network, but it was like local in that own environment.
Yeah, you can set up you can mount folders as basically virtual folders type things in your Docker file.
Yeah, but still it was slow for us. It took almost a minute to start the test. And usually it takes a couple of seconds. So it was totally unusable for us. So I had to roll back those experiments.
Yeah, and there's always a trade-off. So bare metal is always going to be the fastest, and if you need speed, the way to go. But you lose the flexibility of having multiple system interpreters of Ruby or whatever if you need to work on multiple applications and stuff. So there's a give and take, and depending on the business need, and if you are having to support several different versions of SQL and or MySQL, Postgres, or whatever, because you're working on multiple projects, then having something like a containerized development environment is your only solution, because that's what the business need is. But yeah, for the most part, I just use bare metal. I don't worry about the whole container world, just because I haven't found it actually increase my productivity.
Yeah, there are also trade-offs for consistency and cost. But again, I mean, everybody has different concerns. So, to preach one is the one right way, I think is a little bit short-sighted, because somebody's going to have a need for, the critical bare metal implementation, and other people are going to crave the flexibility and consistency and just, our ability to kill and spin back up a Docker container. And so you just, there's a bit of give and take there. But yeah, it makes sense that there are these solutions out there. And I think a lot of these are going to get easier too. As I dig more into Docker, I'm finding some ways that I can automate a lot of that stuff so that it sets up my Docker container and I don't have to do anything. Or if I just need a quick and dirty Redis or Postgres or something else, again, I just spin up a container and it does its thing. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said both ways, and it really just comes down to what you care about.
And, with the way technology has shifted with Docker and Kubernetes, if that's how you say it, and all that stuff, you can have that piped right into your CI/CD. So you have your CI, which is your continuous integration, run all of your unit testing and stuff, and then it needs to be, quote, QA'd, or it needs to have some kind of regression test before you put it to production. So with your continuous integration tool, you can have that tap into Kubernetes that will build out a entire sandboxed environment just like it would be on production. So you can go in and do all your regression testing. And once all of that passes, you can then tell it to trigger the continuous deployment, which would then actually go out and deploy the application either automatically or on a schedule or manually.
I love that. I love how the integration can make things really powerful. And also, if it pushes it off my laptop into, say, somebody else's server, what we call the cloud, right? then then I can keep my workflow, because I like that. We have different problems, whether it's consistency and flexibility or it's just personal productivity. But I also like the idea that until I as a developer can see that personal productivity go up, I'm not likely to do it. So like when I really mess up and I didn't see time, or I didn't see issues that exist in production that don't exist on my laptop, then I don't necessarily see the benefit of it. But like you said, we adjust based on the problems we're facing. I just keep facing the kinds of problems where, for me, if I had a more reliable workflow, if I could trust myself a little bit better with Docker, I think I'd increase my productivity.
I kind of want to push back to the original topic just for a minute. Luca, your article was really interesting. One thing I was curious about is, where do you run into this with DNSimple or DNSimple? Because it seems like it's just serving up domain names, and the time, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a factor. So where are you running into this there?
So I usually pick topics for stuff that I worked on in the recent past. It means I develop a project, I observe it in production to work for real, and then I clean up a little bit the code and extract it, polish it, and share with the community. It not necessarily be something that is related to DNS or certificates. It's something, it could be just a software solution. It could be a design. Okay, this time was different because my goal in general is to make the reader, air quotes, smarter after 3 minutes, even if it's just a small tip and trick. But it's something that they have to learn after reading any blog post. So this time I decided to pick a different topic because I ran into a case where a person over Reddit was looking for feedback for a time elapsed calculation gem. And I dig inside the code because I suspected that the calculation was not correct, because I knew about monotonic clock and all those problems that we discussed. So I said, okay, let's see what about the rest of the Ruby community and Ruby ecosystem. And I did a quick research over GitHub, and I found literally thousands of cases where elapsed time is done with a time now, which again is wrong. So I said, okay, let's do something really informative. It's really basic, as we said, really low-level stuff, but it's something that probably may sound new to Ruby developers. And it turned out I was right in picking this topic. So not really related to DNS, but to Ruby world.
Yeah, and I think this, getting the monatomic time works great if you have just one CPU or one computer that you are booting with and doing the elapsed time. But if this is going behind a load balancer and it's part of a web framework or something like that, you could run into troubles if the time starts on one computer and then it's getting triggered to end on another computer, because they would have two different monatomic times because they were booted at different times. So you do want to be careful about that.
Yeah, for sure. Distributed systems are complex, even more complex than the difference between wall clock and monotonic clock. But that is just, some stuff that is somehow basic. But again, it appears that the Ruby ecosystem doesn't know about the difference between these two clocks. So it's really about just a single program, and then of course you can expand to this problem to distributed system, which are more complex. But again, let's focus on really basics of the language, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of ranged all over the place, but it was really, really interesting. Do you want to just give us a quick update on what's going on with Hanami these days, and then we'll get to some picks?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We recently released 1.2 with new stuff, early hints. This main one, which is something that I dig 3 years ago and waited for the Ruby community, mainly Rack, to be able to do that kind of stuff that is from HTTP2. And the big news on Hanami is that we are joining the forces with ROM and Dry projects to work together on Hanami 2.0, ROM 5, and Dry 1.0. So in the near future, we will announce the plan of how we will reach the next major version of those libraries. And exciting times. We are having the intense and internal discussions on the direction where to take. But the bottom line is that we want to converge our libraries in the way that we want to write them, and the way that we want to propose how to write Ruby web apps to the Ruby community. So yeah, a lot of stuff is going on, and we will announce the plan of action soon.
Cool. We'll definitely get you back to talk about that more. Let's go ahead and do some picks.
Hey, when it comes to health, you probably have some of the same disqualifications that I do. You sit all day, you run a busy life, and when you do make it to the gym, the only thing you're really qualified to do is turn the treadmill on. I was an athlete in high school, and so I could have thrown swimming in the mix, but that was about it. And I didn't really know what to do when I decided that I needed to get my health under control, especially since I have type 2 diabetes and I want to be around for my kids. So I contacted my friend JC over at DevLifts, and DevLifts, they did me a huge favor. Sure, it's a paid service, but what they did is they gave me a workout program. They also gave me some eating guidelines, and they have a Slack room where I can go and I can ask questions, and they give weekly challenges on things that I need to do differently. I really love it. So if you're looking for a way to get into shape, you're looking for a way to improve your health, then go check them out at devlifts.io. That's devlifts.io.
David, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure. Keep it simple today. One pick. Absolutely delighted with this tool. It's called Trifacta. It's been around for about 5 years. It comes out of Stanford, and what it's for is wrangling your data. So you've got a piece of data, it doesn't matter how ugly, and you throw it in this tool, and you can interactively clean it. And then it produces a replayable set of operations that you can run on data. So you build these data pipelines in this tool. So there's a free personal edition. And just to give you a sense of things, I went from a raw data source that usually would take me about 8-10 hours to clean up. And I got from that to finalized report with histograms and data exploration all finished in 20 minutes yesterday. So it's a real time space. It's called Trifacta. And so it's the personal product's free. And then if you want to go enterprise or professional, they charge quite a bit. But it's a great tool for productivity. And I find as a developer, I have that task a lot.
Awesome. Dave, what are your picks?
All right, so I have 3 picks. I'll make them quick. One is a game for mobile devices called Strike Force. It's a Marvel superhero kill the bad guys game, and you can collect Captain America, Iron Man, all the cool heroes and villains. And my son and I love playing it together. He's 3, and he just loves seeing people getting shot and stuff. So that's one pick. And then I used to race cars. I don't know if you knew that about me, but I recently got a 2018 Civic Si, got back into, tuning a bit. So I picked up a Hondata, which is a company that sells flashing software and hardware to modify your ECU air fuel ratios and curves and stuff. So picked up one of those. Loving it so far. And my third one is a site called Mockaroo, and it allows you to generate a CSV of fake data. So if you need to generate 500 rows of a spreadsheet of fake data that you can then use to import into your application or whatever for testing, it makes it really simple and quick and easy to do.
Nice. Very cool. I'm going to jump in with a few picks. So I'm at NGConf, which is the big Angular conference. Like I said, you can go see the videos on YouTube. They should be up by the time this episode's live. But yeah, I've wound up getting some new equipment just to do some of the recording. One of them is, so when I did this for NG Atlanta, I had a different camera. I actually have that camera here too. The problem was that the sound input was really, really terrible, and it didn't have external sound input. And so I found another package on Amazon that actually cost me about $50 less than the package that just gave me that camera. And this package included a camera with a wide angle lens. If you're not familiar with the wide angle lens, it's almost like zooming out just a little bit. In fact, usually when you zoom out, you're using a wide angle lens, but it's not 100% the same thing. Anyway, so it comes with a wide angle lens, so I can just have it set on the table. I'm sitting in a conference room right now at the Grand America Hotel in Salt Lake. And yeah, it's probably 3 feet or so from where I'm going to be interviewing people, just sitting and interviewing people. And it looks like it works pretty well as far as the angle goes. It also came with an external boom mic, which is kind of the mic that looks like if you close your hand, except for your pointer finger, the microphone's basically your finger. So whatever you point it at is what it's going to pick up. And that it was just nice that it came with that. What that means to me though is that if I want to use a different system, for example, I have a Zoom H6 that I have microphones hooked up to. I have Shure SM58s that are hooked up to that. I've had those for a while. I can actually run the audio out from that into the audio in on the camera, and then it's getting the same quality sound that I'm getting on my high quality audio recording. And so that's exciting. You know, the audio quality can do real well there, and it just seems to be really well put together. Also, I ran across one other thing, and that was that I had a tripod, and part of it broke when I was doing the other recording. And so I wound up hooking up, it was like $9. I got a tripod off of Amazon, and it works great. And so, you know, sometimes I'm the kind of person that just wants to fix stuff. But in this case, it worked out terrific where I could just get one for relatively cheap. And then my last pick, I just bought myself a new van. It's a full-size, full-length van. It's the Chevy G-Series van. Now, this one, just to give a little bit of context, the truck I was driving before that was a 1995 Dodge Dakota, and the predominant color on it was rust. And anyway, the thing that I really loved about it was just that it worked and I had a truck. Well, my dad's been going through a bunch of health issues, and he can't actually put any weight on one of his feet, and he can only put a little bit of weight on the other foot for medical reasons. And so my mom drove him over to my sister's house for dinner on Sunday. And we basically had to lift him out of the car and then lift him back in, which wasn't easy because it's one of those low sitting cars. But at the same time, you know, it does make it easy to get him into. So on Facebook Marketplace, if you're looking for like kind of a classifieds place that's different from Craigslist, what I found is the Craigslist ads, and here in Salt Lake, we also have KSL classifieds, and KSL is the local NBC affiliate. Those expire after like 30 days, but the stuff on Facebook Marketplace doesn't expire until they mark it sold or take it down. And so I ran across this van, and it has a wheelchair lift in it, you know, so I can just push buttons and, you know, I wheel him onto it, push buttons, and he's in my van. And yeah, I wound up getting it for $1,500. So it's a 20-year-old van, so what do you expect, right? But anyway, it's a terrific place to find stuff if you're looking for it. Yeah, so anyway, I've got some other stuff, kind of nostalgic stuff that I got since we cleaned out my dad's dental office and found all his video games, but I'll talk about that next week. Luca, what are your picks?
Yeah, my picks are about my 3 interests that I have currently. One is cooking. I want to suggest this online community and iOS app that's called Tasty and Tasty Veg because I'm vegetarian. So there are push notifications of happening in the middle of the morning, just with tasty recipes, and it makes me hungry before lunchtime or dinner time. But I highly suggest if you are looking for new ideas. The second one is a book. It's called The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, and I'm reading through this book. There is a quote from Stoic philosophers for each day of the year, plus one for leap years. And in general, I'm studying Stoic philosophy, and it's helping a lot in my life in general. And the third one is a piece of hardware that I recently bought, and by recently I mean last week, for electronic music, which is my new hobby. It's called Digitakt. It's produced by a Swedish company named Electron. And my main reason I want to get back to music is to stay away from my computer. But then I realized that electronic music now is made with computers, and I hated to sit more hours here to do work and then music. So I got this piece of hardware which is brilliant and completely replace the computer in my workflow, and it's just great.
Awesome. Luca, if people want to follow you on Twitter or Facebook or read blogs or anything like that, where do they go?
My website is lucaguidi.com, and over Twitter I'm Jodosha, which is Jodosha. Yeah, those two places over the internet. And GitHub is I have the same username over GitHub.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I don't think there's anything else, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. This has been great.
All right, we'll catch everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.